Today, a very brief passage, not even telling the whole story, but perhaps it's something to tell us anyway. As we read these two verses from John 20, I'll be reading the words in yellow and invite you to read those in white. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came.
So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and my hand into his side, I will not believe."
We often find it rather amazing how Christianity has lost so many battles against the culture of our day, and amazing that so often we are co-conspirators in the loss. Christmas is about Santa Claus and the North Pole. Easter is about a giant bunny and eggs and candy. Or just how fancy you can dress when you go to church. And if those were the only fairy tales we had to deal with, maybe it wouldn't be quite so bad. But we keep discovering, sometimes in our own life, in our own church, in our own family, but certainly within the broad spectrum of Christianity, this bizarre fairy tale that somehow if we can just be good enough, sometimes if we can just believe the right things that someone tells us to believe, somehow if we can just be the right kind of Christian, and God will make sure that our life goes wonderfully well, and we'll live in the midst of blessedness, free from pain, and disappointment. It's amazing how many people live their lives with that understanding. So much to the point that whenever anything bad happens in their life, the first thing they ask, what did I do wrong? Which can be crushing to experience pain and somehow think that it was your fault. Somehow, because we want to believe it so badly, or because so many people anyway want to believe it so badly, it becomes the central fairy tale to the Christian faith. If you're good enough, if you believe the right things, then you'll have a wonderful life and the rest of them can go burn. Interesting, considering that the central story to the Gospels revolves around the arrest, the brutality inflicted upon Jesus that ultimately led to his death. The central story is about the most faithful individual we can imagine experiencing among the most brutal deaths we've ever been told about. The way I heard the story, my father was hovering somewhere around 26 years old. It was the mid-1940s. He already had two very small children when he received a letter from his grandmother. And I'm not going to say that my father was reluctant to serve his country, but he certainly was not overjoyed to leave his family. experience, I'm sure. But off he went, training at the Great Lakes Naval Station there north of Chicago, gathered with all of the other people who had no clue what they were doing. There to be trained, after all. And one day, they're all gathered, and the invitation is given to them. We'd like some volunteers to paint the barracks. Raise your hand and step forward. They'd already been taught by then you never volunteer for anything. But the way my dad tells it, he says, well, I'm going to be doing something today. I'm okay with painting. I think I'll volunteer to paint. And so he steps forward among several others, figuring that was going to be his day. The next thing we hear, I'm told, is an announcement that those of you who just volunteered, you get a day's pass to go into town to the movies. All the rest of you, we're going to go paint. Not every volunteer story ends up quite that well. The centrality of the gospel is the death of Jesus. And he volunteered for it. We're told time and time again that he knew where this was going. A lot of people, as it turns out, can read the Times. Gandhi could read it. Dr. King could read it. If I keep going down this path, eventually someone's going to kill me. Jesus, circling on the top of that place. If I keep doing what I'm doing, which I believe is God's will for me, the way I'm supposed to express myself, this force fighting against me will eventually kill me. He volunteered for it. He struggled with the decision, we're told, in the garden, in his prayer, when certainly part of it just says, let's rethink this. It's getting too real. And yet he complies. He lays down his life for the people God loved. And if that would have been the end of that story, that would have been the end of that story. We wouldn't have ever heard about it. It was that next central event of the resurrection. That next magnificent moment when we discover that sometimes death is not the end. That sometimes pain and suffering is not the end. That somehow God has a way for us to rise above it all. And so in Jesus we see him volunteering to serve the same way he has called us to serve. And then revealing to us the sacrifice will be worth the price you pay. The resurrection, the redemption, the impact of what you do will be worth the pain and suffering you experience. He rises. He appears to his disciples. Thomas isn't there. They tell him. And he has the most sensible, reasonable response that any human being could and probably should have when someone tells you a story like that. It boils down to these two words on the screen. Prove it. 18, 19 centuries later, we start discovering that organized religion, the Christian church in its many variations, has grown quite accustomed to raising the children in the faith, teaching them to simply believe what we tell them, chastising them if they ever really question anything, educating them sometimes, not just through primary, not just through secondary, but even in higher education. This is what you believe. We're telling it to you now. Just parrot it back to us. And gather on the Sunday with all the other parrots. And it worked. Right? We never questioned it. We just listened. We just said we believed, whether we'd ever given a thought to it at all. And then somewhere, as Western society advanced, the scientific method grew up, and Christianity quit killing people who challenged or questioned their authority. Thomas started showing up all over the place. Even today, we don't know what to say to Thomas. We're just fine with other people who are raised believers, who have the basic story and who nod when we repeat the oft-told stories. But when someone just stands up and looks us in the eye and says, "Prove it," what? Huh? No one's ever said that before. We just weren't prepared. No one prepared us. Somehow the story of Thomas just kind of, I don't know, never really sunk in. We just assume, well, Thomas is just a real unfaithful jerk. I hope I'm never like him. Never question anything. We just didn't know what to do when people said, "I don't think what you're telling me makes any sense at all." Explain it to me. Convince me. Prove it. And we stammer and we stutter and we say, this person probably a little too hard to work with. Let's just let them go and we'll find someone else who just nods their head when we talk to them. Someone that just really is eager to believe whatever we say. Which in part I think explains that the fastest growing category of individuals on a religious spectrum in the U.S. are the ones who say they have no religious affiliation at all. Fastest growing. Many of them had parents who were Thomases, and the church never was able to prove anything with them. Many of them had parents who discovered what the church was about by watching the scandals in the 1970s, television evangelism, and listening to the horror stories within the Roman Catholic Church. Many of them had had enough of the self-righteous, church-going people that harassed them all the time. We couldn't reach the parents. We don't know what to say to the children. honestly, certainly, if I had the answer, my entire career would turn out quite a bit differently. But I do have a question. Are we willing to learn how to prove it? Are we willing to work that hard? Because sometimes we're just not. To find what it is we need to say and say it loudly enough. To find what it is we need to do and do it in such an obvious manner that, yes, it speaks for itself sometimes. To help people believe in a God whose faithfulness extends beyond death. A God whose love and grace sometimes only begins in tragedy. A God who leads us through and finds redemption for us in the worst moments of our lives, through the times when life has simply sought to destroy us, when friends, so-called, have stabbed us in the back, or when we, blindly or with eyes wide open, walk down the path of self-destruction. Is there redemption when life has done that to you, when friends have done that to you, when you've done that to yourself? If we can show that there is, if we can tell our stories clearly enough, if we can provide ministry to the people who need a resurrection moment, who need to know they're redeemed, who need to know that we haven't given up on them because God never gave up on us. Maybe we'll start to prove something. With the grace of God, let us pray. We're on the heel of God, not because we got it right the first time, but because you allowed us second chances, because you sent people into our lives who loved us despite the moments when we didn't love ourselves, despite the fact that sometimes our stories were so sad that almost no one wanted to listen. And despite those occasional moments when we were ready to give up and call it a day. But you loved us through those moments. That's why we're here. That's how we can rise in the morning and come to worship and sing songs of praise. It's not because life has always been wonderful. It's because you have always been faithful. And that drives us, and that comforts us, and that heals our brokenness, and it gives us purpose and direction. So teach us what to say, what to do. Give us the will and the courage to say it and do it, that we might provide evidence to